gender-affirming care and trans ideology being pushed on impressionable children.
She was just 6 years old when the world first heard her voice. Jazz Jennings stood in front of cameras, smiling brightly, a symbol of courage, hope, and change. But what the world didn't see was the weight she was carrying behind that smile. Years later, the same girl who inspired millions would break down in front of the same cameras that once made her a star. This is not just a story about fame or identity. It's about what happens when a child becomes a symbol, and that symbol is slowly crushed under the pressure to be perfect. What really happened to Jazz Jennings? And why is her life now so painfully heartbreaking? Stay with us, because this story will stay with you long after the video ends. Jazz Jennings was born in South Florida in 2000 to a loving and supportive family. Assigned male at birth, Jazz began expressing her female identity as early as age 2. Most toddlers might be learning how to speak in short sentences, but Jazz was already making it clear. She was a girl. This wasn't a phase, nor was it confusion. It was a heartfelt truth that would define the rest of her life. Her parents, Jeanette and Greg Jennings, listened closely. And instead of pushing Jazz into silence, they embraced her identity with open hearts. Her story was rare, almost unheard of at the time. Transgender children weren't discussed openly in the media, let alone given platforms to speak. But Jazz's early awareness of who she was and her parents' unwavering support would set her on a unique path. By the time Jazz was 5, she had socially transitioned and was living fully as a girl. Her family made a bold choice to stand by her, even as society questioned and judged. They weren't just protecting their child, they were preparing to advocate for countless others. In 2007, a 6-year-old Jazz Jennings made her television debut in a groundbreaking interview with Barbara Walters on 2020. America watched in awe as this confident young girl explained her identity with clarity far beyond her years. Her presence wasn't just powerful, it was historic. For many viewers, it was the first time they had even heard of a transgender child. Jazz didn't stumble over her words or seem confused. She was radiant, sure of herself, and unafraid. That interview went viral, and Jazz's life would never be the same. She quickly became a lightning rod in the national conversation about transgender rights. Some praised her courage, while others reacted with harsh skepticism or outright cruelty. But Jazz pressed forward. She wasn't just a child anymore. She was becoming a symbol, a representative of a misunderstood community. What made Jazz so compelling wasn't just that she was transgender, it was that she was honest. Her emotions were raw, her smile infectious, and her clarity of purpose breathtaking. Viewers were drawn to her not because of controversy, but because of her humanity. In 2015, Jazz and her family took another leap, starring in their own reality series, I Am Jazz, on TLC. The show followed her daily life, from navigating high school and friends to dealing with doctors, surgeries, and identity struggles. For the first time, viewers saw the full scope of a transgender teen's life, not just the headlines, but the day-to-day triumphs and heartbreaks. The series wasn't polished or perfect. It was messy, emotional, and often hard to watch. Jazz's vulnerability on camera was striking. She opened up about fears of rejection, the pressure to be a role model, and the physical and emotional toll of transitioning. Yet she never backed down. I Am Jazz broke barriers. It wasn't just a reality show. It was a documentation of history unfolding. And through every season, Jazz grew not just in age, but in strength. The show became a platform for educating families, opening minds, and challenging stereotypes. But with every episode, the weight on Jazz's shoulders grew heavier. Jazz's fame exploded almost overnight. She became a fixture in the media, gracing magazine covers, giving speeches, and even publishing a children's book titled I Am Jazz. Appearances on shows like The Rosie Show and Oprah further catapulted her into national prominence. With her growing platform came accolades. She was named one of Time magazine's 25 most influential teens. But fame came with a darker side. Jazz became a target of online hate and public backlash. Trolls flooded her social media with vicious comments, while critics accused her parents of exploiting her. Every move she made was scrutinized. What she wore, how she spoke, even how she looked, it all became public property. Despite the praise and progress, Jazz often felt more exposed than celebrated. She was still a teenager, dealing with the pressures of adolescence while shouldering the burden of representation. And as the spotlight intensified, so did the pressure to be perfect, to be the transgender role model everyone expected. Jazz wasn't just a TV star, she was an advocate. She gave speeches at schools, spoke at medical conferences, and participated in pride events across the country. She became the face of the Trans Kids Purple Rainbow Foundation, which her parents helped launch. Her voice carried weight in a national conversation that desperately needed nuance, empathy, and truth. She did all this while still navigating the challenges of being a teenager. Imagine juggling school, friends, dating, and self-discovery, while also defending your identity to the world. Jazz carried that responsibility with grace, but it was never easy. Her impact was undeniable. For thousands of trans kids, Jazz was a beacon. She gave them hope. She told them they weren't alone. But the very thing that made her a symbol, the vulnerability, the openness, the honesty, was also slowly breaking her down. Beneath the strength was a young woman who, like everyone else, just wanted to be understood. Behind Jazz Jennings' vibrant smile and bright personality was a private struggle few knew the full extent of, her painful relationship with food and her body. As the seasons of I Am Jazz progressed, viewers began to notice changes, not just in her emotions, but in her physical appearance. By season 6, Jazz had gained a significant amount of weight, and it wasn't just the result of typical teenage growth. It was rooted in something deeper, emotional trauma and unresolved pain. Jazz openly shared that she used food as a coping mechanism. The pressure of being a public figure, constantly scrutinized and expected to represent an entire community, became too much. Late-night binges weren't about hunger. They were about comfort, about control, about silencing the storm in her mind. Her eating habits spiraled, and with it came self-blame, shame, and a mounting sense of failure. Despite the loving support of her family, Jazz felt she was letting everyone down, including herself. Her body, once the source of so much dysphoria, before her transition had become another battleground, and this time the fight wasn't just about identity, it was about survival. Fame had opened doors for Jazz, but it also closed many. She was admired across the world, yet deeply lonely. She was loved on camera, but off camera, she was falling apart. As the pressure built, Jazz began to unravel mentally. Anxiety attacks became more frequent. Depression crept in quietly, but stayed for years. She became withdrawn, overwhelmed by the burden of always having to be on. In interviews and on her show, Jazz admitted to feeling like a failure at times, despite all she had achieved. She constantly questioned whether she was good enough, strong enough, worthy enough. The perfectionism she developed from always being under a microscope became toxic. She had been forced to grow up faster than most kids, and now the emotional cost was catching up. Therapy became a necessity, not a choice. Her mental health team worked tirelessly to help Jazz rediscover balance, but the wounds ran deep. For by a girl who had once radiated joy and confidence, Jazz now often struggled just to get out of bed. One of the most intense moments in Jazz's life, and the show's most watched episodes, was her gender confirmation surgery. After years of waiting at 17, Jazz underwent the life-changing procedure, but what was meant to be the final step in her journey turned into a complicated and painful ordeal. Due to her hormone blockers and early transition, Jazz didn't have enough tissue to perform the surgery in the standard way. Doctors had to create an alternate approach, which led to multiple complications. Her first surgery didn't go as planned, and she needed a corrective surgery just a few weeks later. It wasn't just physically painful, it was emotionally devastating. Jazz documented the experience with honesty and vulnerability. She described waking up in excruciating pain and at times feeling like she had made a mistake, even though she knew she hadn't. The road to healing was long, with ongoing procedures and medical appointments that never seemed to end. What was once a dream turned into a nightmare, and the physical scars were just the beginning. Jazz Jennings didn't just carry her own story, she carried the hopes of an entire movement. Whether she wanted to or not, she became a spokesperson for transgender youth. Every word she said, every outfit she wore, every opinion she voiced was dissected. People expected her to be flawless, fearless, and always politically correct. But she was still just a teenager trying to figure herself out. The pressure became unbearable. Jazz described feeling like she had to be perfect because she knew millions were watching. Trans kids who saw her as a role model, and critics waiting for her to slip. This constant fear of disappointing people, of saying the wrong thing, of being misunderstood, it wore her down. She started questioning her own worth and whether she could live up to the expectations placed upon her. Her family stood by her, but even they couldn't fully shield her from the emotional toll. The fame that once empowered her began to feel like a cage, one she couldn't escape from. And deep down, Jazz began to wonder, who was she, really, outside of the public eye? As the seasons of I Am Jazz continued, viewers saw a young woman who seemed increasingly torn between who she was and who she was expected to be. Cameras were always rolling, personal struggles were public content, her private life became storylines, and slowly, the line between performance and reality blurred. Jazz often said she felt like she wasn't living for herself anymore. She was living for the show, for the movement, for everyone else. Her life became about filming schedules, interviews, and media appearances. There was little room for stillness, reflection, or healing, and the toll was evident. By the time she turned 18, Jazz looked emotionally exhausted. Her once bright eyes carried the weight of someone twice her age. The joy she once felt from sharing her story had been replaced with fatigue, anxiety, and a deep yearning for peace. By the time Season 7 of I Am Jazz aired, it was clear to viewers that something had shifted. Jazz, once full of energy and clarity, now appeared visibly overwhelmed. Scenes from the show showed her sobbing uncontrollably, struggling to complete daily tasks, and clashing with her family over decisions. The pressure of being a transgender icon, a TV star, and a soon-to-be college student had reached a boiling point. In one particularly emotional episode, Jazz broke down in front of the cameras. She admitted that she felt like a failure, not just to herself, but to everyone who believed in her. "I just want to feel okay," she said through tears. "I don't want to keep disappointing people." Her vulnerability was raw and gut-wrenching, revealing a young woman on the edge of emotional collapse. The breakdown wasn't staged, it wasn't scripted, it was real, and it was heartbreaking. Jazz had spent most of her life being strong for others. Now she could barely hold herself together. For fans who had followed her journey from childhood, it was painful to watch the girl they had admired crumble under the weight of expectations no one her age should bear. Jazz's acceptance into Harvard University was supposed to be a triumphant moment. It was the culmination of years of hard work and a symbol of hope for every trans youth watching her. But behind the scenes, Jazz was paralyzed with fear. The academic pressure, the looming responsibility of independence, and the emotional exhaustion. She had been carrying all collided at once. She delayed her enrollment, citing mental health reasons. It was a bold and honest move, but also a painful one. Jazz had always dreamed of attending Harvard, but when the moment arrived, she realized she wasn't ready. Not emotionally, not mentally, not physically. Her dream had become a source of anxiety, not inspiration. Her decision sparked public discussion. Critics accused her of being lazy or entitled, while supporters applauded her honesty. But for Jazz, the issue wasn't about what people thought. It was about survival. She knew that pushing forward while broken would only do more harm. So she paused. She took time. And for the first time in a long time, she chose herself. Romantic relationships were another area of Jazz's life that proved complicated and painful. As a transgender woman in the public eye, dating came with layers of difficulty most people couldn't imagine. Jazz wanted love like everyone else, but what she got was often rejection, fetishization, or confusion. Some people were drawn to her fame, not her heart. Others couldn't see past her transgender identity. And still others were afraid of what dating someone like Jazz might do to their own reputations. Every attempt at a relationship felt like walking through a minefield. On I Am Jazz, viewers saw her struggle to connect romantically. First dates ended awkwardly. Heart-to-hearts turned into heartbreak. She questioned whether she would ever find someone who saw her for who she truly was, not as a symbol, not as a headline, but simply as Jazz. The pain of romantic rejection cut deep, and the loneliness it left behind often lingered longer than the cameras ever captured. While Jazz dealt with her internal struggles, the outside world wasn't kind. As her fame grew, so did the hate. Online trolls flooded her comment sections with cruel messages, transphobic slurs, accusations, insults about her weight, her surgery, her family. Every part of her life was dissected, judged, and mocked. No matter how strong her support system was, the hate hurt. She tried to brush it off, to stay above it. But when you're already struggling inside, even one cruel comment can feel like a punch to the gut. For every encouraging message from a trans teen or a grateful parent, there were 10 others filled with venom. Jazz often said that she had developed thick skin, but no skin is thick enough to endure that much cruelty, that consistently, for that long. It chipped away at her confidence. It made her question her worth. It drained her, and at times it made her want to disappear completely. In a candid interview after her hiatus from public life, Jazz spoke the words that many had long suspected, but never heard so clearly, "I'm not okay." For the first time, she stopped trying to hold it all together for the cameras. She admitted that the weight she carried was crushing her, that she didn't know who she was anymore, that the fight had nearly broken her. She said she felt like she had been performing her entire life, smiling when she was sad, advocating when she needed rest, pretending to be okay when she was falling apart. Her bravery wasn't in her perfection, it was in her honesty. Jazz wasn't trying to be a hero anymore. She was trying to be human. These admissions weren't a sign of weakness. They were a sign of immense strength. In telling the world she was struggling, Jazz gave others permission to do the same. She reminded everyone that even icons have limits and that mental health should never be sacrificed for visibility. After years of cameras, interviews, and constant scrutiny, Jazz Jennings made a quiet, courageous decision to step away from the spotlight. It wasn't a dramatic exit or a media stunt. It was a quiet retreat, a way to finally breathe. After living so much of her life in front of the world, she needed a break from being Jazz Jennings, the public figure, and a chance to simply be Jazz. This withdrawal wasn't announced with fanfare. Fans simply began noticing her reduced presence online and fewer public appearances. Her social media posts became more reflective, more spaced out. She stopped filming new episodes of I Am Jazz for a time and focused inward. While some interpreted this as fading from relevance, those closest to her knew the truth. Jazz was healing. The silence was intentional. For a young woman who had spent so many years sharing everything, from her surgeries to her most private emotions, privacy became a powerful act of self-love. It was Jazz's way of reclaiming her life, not as a TV character, but as a person. Healing isn't quick, especially when the wounds run deep. Jazz's journey toward peace hasn't been linear, and it certainly hasn't been easy. But it has been brave. She continued her therapy sessions both for mental health and for body image. She reconnected with her core family unit, her parents and brothers, who remained her biggest supporters. Jazz worked hard on rebuilding her relationship with herself. For so long, she had looked in the mirror and seen judgment, weight gain, scars, imperfections. Now she was learning to look with compassion. Therapy helped her unpack the years of pressure, the trauma of public life, and the loss of her own identity in the process. Her mental health was still a work in progress, but that was okay. Jazz never claimed to have all the answers. What mattered now was that she had stopped running. From pain, from fear, from herself. She was showing up for her own life in a way she hadn't been able to in years. In her time away from fame, Jazz began exploring new creative outlets that brought her peace. She turned to painting, writing, and even poetry as ways to express the emotions she had once bottled up for the cameras. Art became her therapy, a way to process the grief, the joy, the confusion, and the hope. She began sharing some of her artwork on social media, not for validation, but as a window into her healing. Her brushstrokes spoke louder than words. They were filled with color, chaos, and meaning. Each piece told a part of her story that couldn't be captured on TV. Jazz also started journaling again, privately at first, then occasionally sharing her reflections. She considered writing a follow-up memoir, not to reclaim the spotlight, but to help others understand what healing from fame and trauma truly looks like. Her goals had shifted. It wasn't about being famous anymore. It was about being whole. Throughout, Jazz's journey, her parents, Jeanette and Greg, have been her rock. But even they have admitted they made mistakes. In recent interviews, they've reflected honestly on what it meant to put their child's life on national television. Jeanette, in particular, has expressed deep emotion over watching her daughters' pain unfold on screen, sometimes missing the signs in real life. They did what they thought was best, amplifying Jazz's voice to help the world understand transgender youth. But in doing so, they sometimes overlooked the emotional toll it took on their daughter. Now they've taken a step back, focusing more on Jazz's peace than her platform. Their support remains unwavering. They attend therapy as a family, respect Jazz's boundaries, and encourage her to pursue the quiet life she's begun building. For them, being proud of Jazz doesn't mean putting her on a pedestal anymore. It means seeing her safe, supported, and at peace, even if the world no longer watches. Jazz Jennings' story is far from over, but her legacy is already etched in history. She was one of the first transgender youths to live her truth publicly and unapologetically. She broke down doors, educated millions, and became a lifeline for kids who had no one else to look up to. But perhaps her greatest contribution wasn't her fame. It was her honesty. Jazz showed the world what courage looks like, not just in the triumphs, but in the breakdowns, the tears, the messy middle. She proved that being a role model doesn't mean being perfect. It means being real. Her life now may not be what the headlines predicted. It's not all red carpets and speaking tours. It's quieter, slower, more sacred. And in that quiet, Jazz has found something she'd been missing for years, herself. If you were inspired or moved by Jazz Jennings' story, consider leaving a comment below. Share your thoughts, your love, or even your own experience. And if you want to support Jazz's mission of compassion and awareness, give this video a like and subscribe for more stories that matter. Because behind every headline is a human being, and every human deserves to be heard.